Morning. The subcommittee will come to order. This morning we will be examining how to define and improve success for student veterans. VA's education and training programs have been credited with successfully transitioning and readjusting returning service members for generations. In fact, many historians believe that the passage of the GI Bill following World War II kept this country out of a recession that very well could have spiraled into another depression. It has been reported that the post-World War II GI benefits educated 10 million returning veterans, among them 14 Nobel Prize and 24 Pulitzer Prize winners, 3 presidents, a dozen senators, and 3 Supreme Court justices. It was through this lens that Congress authorized and expanded several education and training programs throughout the years, including the newest and by far the most generous program to date, the post-9/11 GI Bill. VA estimates that during the next fiscal year, they expect to pay out $15 billion in payments to students and schools for education and training. While I firmly believe that our veterans deserve every penny of these benefits, it has become clear to me and to most in the veteran community that there simply have not been enough metrics to track the return on taxpayer investment through student success. Given our federal government's fiscal challenges, we owe it to hardworking American families to develop, track, monitor, and report these metrics. I was surprised to learn that up until a few years ago, we didn't even begin to start tracking graduation rates or many other statistics that track student success. That is why I'm happy to see that there seems to be a growing partnership between advocacy groups, students, schools, and the VA to truly understand the rates of success for our student veterans. I look forward to hearing about the Million Records Project and how this data will positively mold the future for student veterans, schools, and VA administrations and the VA's administration of GI Bill benefits. Why is this important? It is important because this data will help inform Congress about student veteran behavior and show schools and the VA what type of best practices and policies will improve outcomes for student veterans. I also want to comment on VA's implementation of the Transparency Act from last Congress. I know that the VA created the new comparison tool and complaint system on a shoestring budget. And while there are many limitations to these tools, I think that they have the potential to be a game changer and have allowed for better transparency for our student veterans. I look forward to hearing more about these and other VA programs, including the Vet Success on Campus program, during today's hearing. In the end, it is up to the student to make the right choice and to use their hard-earned benefits wisely. It is our job to ensure that they have the tools they need to be successful and to make the right decisions to help both themselves and their families. Thank you for your testimony, Dr. Vito, and again, thank you the entire panel for your testimony. I'll now yield myself 5 minutes for questions. The first question is for everyone on the panel. What are your thoughts on the VA comparison tool and whether you think its functions are valuable for veterans? We'll just start left to right if we can. Mr. Doctor.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So I'm a proponent of the VA comparison tool. I think it needs to be updated with certain information when it becomes available, including data on completion rates for military veterans specifically, and that needs to be included in there. But by and large, I think it's a good system. I'm glad it's been rolled out, and I am supportive of it.
Okay, thank you. And by the way, when each of you give your answers, if you would tell us what you think needs to be added or changed about the tool as well. Mr. Hubbard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Similarly, we think the comparison tool is a fantastic opportunity for vets to see an aggregated view of information that otherwise would have been unavailable. It would have probably taken 20 PhDs to pull all that information together otherwise. So to have a single view of that is a huge, huge support to all student veterans. As a first iteration, I think it's an excellent start. I think that there is fine-tuning that could be done. Particularly, there's parts of information that I think a lot of student veterans would like to see in that view, some of which would be supportive of their college search. I think being able to reach out to particular universities to take the information that they're getting, that they're comparing these schools, and being able to reach out to vets on campus as another opportunity of informing themselves would be very important.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Torres.
Thank you. We actually think that the tool is a breakthrough. It's a very important first step in the process. However, there are two areas that I think that we could really can stand to improve. First, it does not calculate an individual veteran's entitlement and track what part of the entitlement has been used. So it's an estimator, which is great, and it's informative. It really doesn't help the veteran shop easily for what school they need to be, how it apply to different institutions that they're thinking about applying to. The second limitation of the tool is that while it was designed to really limit the work burdens on schools, the graduation rates that are being used are really not relevant to what actually happens at the institutional level. Over a third of students overall in the country transfer from one school to another, and therefore the completion rates that are in the IPEDS numbers really don't bear any resemblance to what actually is happening on there. I believe my colleagues to the left could probably comment on how they leverage information around transfers at their own institutions. But I believe that's a second step in terms of trying to come up with a better way so that a veteran, looking at their pathways, which is the other piece, right, because the completion rates include first-time, full-time students, which is not what the veteran is, right? They are older, and you have to look at what are the odds of success for people who look like them, and what is their odds, and by types of institutions. So I think further segmentation is required. But I think, again, it's a great start, but I think, like everything else, I think we need to continue to improve where we're headed with the tool.
Okay. Mr. Ross?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me first say that I think transparency is incredibly important to all of our students, and particularly to veterans. They deserve to get as much information as they can when they're making college decisions, and this tool, I think, is helpful in that regard. I think Mr. Torres points out very importantly that the information that's in there needs to be accurate. And as I said in my testimony, under our new policies, if you've had 2 years in the military, you will come to us as a transfer student. The military will be the transferring institution. That's the way we'll count it, is a way to enable students a clear pathway into our institutions. If you do that, their data doesn't count because they're transfer students. And so I think we've got to be sure the data is right. We have a dashboard that we've recently put up that tracks all sorts of metrics and information on success, student success. And we want to be sure what we put there is the most accurate information possible. So, I applaud the tool. I think it's a helpful step. It can be improved, and we're happy to work with you to do that.
Okay. Dr. Vito?
Thank you. Seconds, I would like to support the comments of Mr. Torres and Mr. Ross, big time. I think it's a great first step, and I think focusing on the data and the multiple pathways, and then making it easy for vets to be able to compare different institutions, apples to apples, in ways that will be clear and easy. I think that we sometimes forget how easy it is to do things like that in other settings, and we need to use that same model here. Thank you.
Well, thank each of you for your testimony, and I want to say that some of the recommendations we saw in your verbal and your written testimony was outstanding, and thank you for that. Thank you for the participation in the Million Records Project. That was also very helpful. Provides great data. Now, a couple of closing comments before we excuse the panel and move on to the next panel. Mr. Ross, I was pleased to learn that your governor on Tuesday of this week has announced that his support for in-state tuition in North Carolina, and so we hope that you and the governor are successful with your General Assembly. Also, there was some dialogue before about for-profit schools, and I would note that there's no lack of regulation of the education industry, and that's all of the education, public, private, and for-profit. The VA, the Consumer Federal Protection Bureau, the Federal Trade Commission, U.S. Department of Education, state attorneys general, state licensing agencies, state departments of education, state approving agencies, and accrediting associations all have a responsibility to monitor all sections of higher education. If there is a systemic problem, which I don't believe there is, the only conclusion I can draw is that multiple government agencies at all levels have failed to monitor the education industry and enforce the statutes and regulations now in place. With that, we'll conclude the participation of this panel. Mr. Duck and Mr. Hubbard, thank you for your service. Thank all of you for your support of our nation's veterans, one of our most valuable resources. And thank you for in particular for the innovative ideas that you shared with us today. You're not excused. I recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. Share with us what feedback you've received so far about career scope. And when you're doing that, tell me about what students are saying about whether it's helpful in finding a school. And then let's walk forward and tell me what your plans are for future functionality and tweaks and improvements and so forth.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, I just want to be clear. Are you talking the Career Scope tool or the comparison tool?
Career Scope tool.
The Career Scope tool. The Career Scope tool is an assessment device for students or for anybody to go in and use it. We've had about 10,000 people use it. It is also used by our vocational rehabilitation and employment counselors across the country as well. The feedback we've received so far has been good. It's a useful tool. It certainly doesn't solve all things, but it gives that individual a direction to head as they go forward in their school selection.
Okay. And can you go into some of the funding issues that you ran into in the development of the Career Scope tool, the complaint tool, or the complaint system, and the comparison tool, all three of you? The systems that you talked about in your testimony.
Just to understand what issues we had with funding?
Yes, sir.
These were all tools that were as a result of the public law, the President's executive order, and initiatives that we were doing within VA as well. With respect to the complaint tool or feedback tool, we leveraged what the Department of Defense did. We took their system. We modified it with the contractor that developed their tool, and we modified it for the VA. So it was a minimal expense, if you will, for that. For the comparison tool, there was sort of an in-house effort, and we strung that together with my terms, duct tape and chicken wire, and put it together. It's a fantastic success story. We took data from over 23 disparate sites, and it's now at one place. As far as the Career Scope tool, that is a commercial off-the-shelf item. What we did, our investment in that, was putting it on the site, pay the licensing fees, and actually doing the market survey with respect to that.
Okay. And by the way, thanks for your help with the Million Records project. Appreciate the VA's involvement with that. How does the VA define success, and what are the barriers that you think are still in place when it comes to veterans accessing a quality education and the assistance they need while pursuing their degrees?
We are looking at a lot of different success factors as we go forward. Certainly defining success is a challenge, as you might imagine. You've heard testimony earlier here today, as well as prior testimony, that veterans are non-traditional students. And so what we find in non-traditional students is many of them start full-time, then they go part-time, then they stop and say, when the kids get older, I'll go back to school. And so defining what that success is hard. We're doing a number of different things. We currently have 7 measures that we hope to be rolling out in the next several months. One is retention rate. That measures the student attendance at the same institution over time. There's persistence rate, and what that does is it measures veteran students full-time and part-time across the board, and I have some preliminary numbers that are interesting. We also are measuring the transfer rate. We're measuring graduation rates, certificate completion, the number of years to complete a degree or certificate, and the number of institutions veterans attend to complete their degree or certificate. As you heard this morning, the current IPEDS graduation rate tool is over a 6-year time frame, but it doesn't allow for any transfers in or out. So that's certainly a challenge because no matter what we do, it's going to want to be compared to one or another. Interestingly, as I go out and talk to many folks, I suggest to people that there were 16 million veterans who served in World War II. 8 million of them went to school on the GI Bill, and as we all know, that spawned the next greatest the greatest generation. But when you ask what the graduation rate was, how many certificate completions, and any of those kinds of things, there's never been any of that sort of information because it's hard. And so defining the success outcomes, we're going to put this on the table. The Million Records Project put a stick in the ground. We're also doing similar type things. The other issue or concern that makes it a little bit hard is that schools input this data. So the data sometimes is only as good as the information that we get out. Interestingly, though, is as we go forward with the comparison tool and we start publishing some of that data on there, what we'll find is schools and institutions sort of center themselves. For example, we went out before we launched the tool and we sent out all this information and said, would you validate this? Tell us. There were 400 schools within a week that said, no, we want to sign up for the Principles of Excellence as well. We didn't know anything about it. So publishing those things, I think, will be a great opportunity for schools to center themselves.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Coy. Thank you, Mr. Coy. You're now excused. I thank everyone in the audience for your attendance today and for the frank discussion that we've had regarding educational opportunities for our veterans and how to improve success for our student veterans. Finally, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to include any extraneous material in the record of today's hearing. Hearing no objection, so ordered. If there's nothing further, this hearing is now adjourned.